Hi, I'm Lynn Green. Welcome to Art of the Matter, Sculptors Edition. Follow along as I visit local Penticton sculptors and find out what inspires them. It's so exciting to have public art in our community of Penticton.
So today, we're standing in my shop. It's a little packed. We got a variety of different stuff that we've got going on and that we're finished. I deal with steel sculptures. I build and create anything that I could pretty much imagine, or anything that you could probably imagine and pretty much anybody else could imagine. So I like what I do. It started off as a hobby, but now it's become practically a business, an everyday living business, so work. So
how did the hobby start?
Well, the hobby started actually a couple different ways, but the main way I started was watching my dad. My dad was a welder. He taught me how to weld at an early age. About 11, 12 years old, I started tack welding. So years later, I just got into helping my dad weld up certain things like little fence gates and things like that. And one day I seen a piece of steel on the ground and I pictured an arrow. So this is the arrow story. I tell everybody how I started with the artwork. So I built an arrow out of a steel shaft, made it look pretty cool. I didn't think much of it, but the person who was buying the little gate that my dad was building also purchased the arrow on site. And I thought, well, if I can build these arrows to sell, then maybe I'll build another one. So I did, and it just kept going. And the next thing led to another, to bigger projects, and to what we do today now. So now we do some of our sculptures stand to be 3 stories high, to tons and tons of steel. So which is pretty cool.
What are some of the challenges that you've had with?
Some of the challenges is really just imagination and how I'm going to be able to manipulate the steel to get it to the way I see it. Not usually always the way it wants to be, but how I can make it work the way I see it. So some of the challenges would be the coloring process, whether it be through heat or a transparent paint, or even as simple as the hanging of our sculptures. But even the hanging of our sculptures is something that we think a lot about, and we usually build patterns for them. A lot easier for the installers to put together, so we help them out by building like sheet patterns for the bolt patterns and things like that. Really, there hasn't been too much challenges to what we've done so far. So we usually like to think of everything from beginning to end before we even start the project. So,
do you have a large crew right now?
No, just me and my right-hand man, which is Rick Hamilton. My wife, she helps me out with the paperwork and stuff quite a bit of the times. She's an amazing supporter in what I do. I mean, she's there's times where I've wanted to walk away, and she's like, "You got to stick to it." So she's been quite the supporter for that, and thanking her for that, because there was a time I did want to quit. I think at that time, I wanted to quit is when I knew I needed a partner. So that's when I hired Rick to come and help me out. But at that time, what I was going through was with just about any artist, you kind of have to ask yourself once in a while, are you a contractor or are you an artist, right? Because a lot of the stuff I do is based on people's ideas of what they want to see in steel, not based upon what I can do with steel. So, and some of the imagination that I have to be able to build my own style and sculptures always linger and haunt me like every day as I build other people's ideas. So at that time I thought that maybe I'd just quit doing this and do something different. But then my wife was like, yeah, you should just keep doing this and see where it takes you. And if I didn't listen to her, who knows where I'd be today, but I'm here today doing some pretty major sculptures for the Okanagan, as well as smaller stuff for other places around the world. So it's been quite successful. Quite happy with it, actually. So
Can you talk to us about all the things that you're working on right now and what's in the works?
Oh, as of today, we are working on, right now we're doing one piece for a restaurant, Kukuli Cafe, wall hanging. We're doing their logo for their wall. We just finished Tree of Life for a center in the middle of Kelowna. Mm-hmm. And right now, just finished signing up some contracts for the Osius band in Osius for the cultural centers. We're doing some work for Area 27, which is going to be probably our biggest project, one of our biggest projects, which is it's going to be a pretty big steel eagle that we'll be doing. And we have some work coming in from Kamloops as well. So it's coming in from all over the place. You'd think that during the COVID time and the times that we're going through today, that it would have slowed somebody like me down or whatever, but I guess when people stay home and businesses just tend to stay home, I don't know, making money, I don't know how or whatever, but people want to spend money on sculptures now, so we've gotten to be pretty busy, pretty well known, so it keeps us going, keeps us on our toes. So we have a lot of projects on the go today, as well as like traditional cooking pits that we have for our schools, gates that we're doing for Vernon Reserve. We got lots of stuff going on. So this one is the image for the Kukuli Cafe out of Kamloops and Westbank. So this is the first stage. I'll be cutting another piece that goes up in here with a lot more detail and stuff at, same with up here. And then this will be a three-piece coloring system, so it'll be black, silver, and red. So yeah, so this is just the first cut.
So can you tell us more about your big eagle, where it goes, how do you even put it onto the rock, and what inspired you?
Well, the owner of Area 27, one of the owners, contacted me and asked me if I'd be able to do a sculpture of an eagle. He asked me if I could do one bigger the better. So me dealing with steel, I can build a steel 100 feet wide if I wanted to. So we had to really sit down and figure out realistically how big he wanted this. So we're averaging this eagle to be about 12-foot wingspan to 20 feet wingspan. Its body size will be anywhere from 5 feet to 7 feet, maybe even 8. The idea behind it is something I had to ask him, because I like to ask a lot of questions before I get into any of my artwork, is how did he come across the idea of the eagle? And it inspired me to be able to want to actually do this sculpture more after I heard his story about as they were building the Area 27 track. One of the road keepers that were building the roads and helping maintain the roads and stuff was working on this tire work on one of the corners, and he said there was a big shadow that passed by him, and he looked up and there was this big bird in the sky. He said he thought it was two of them, until he realized that this big bird let whatever it was go, and one of the things were dropping, and when it dropped, it was a coyote. So it was an eagle that actually got a hold of a coyote and flew him over the trees and then dropped him in the middle of the pavement. And then the idea behind that was just how powerful and how for him the idea was that not too often you're going to be able to see something like that, as well as see an eagle hunting in that form. So he wanted to be able to keep that idea and build it into this sculpture, and I thought that was a cool story. So, and in our culture and our tradition, coyote is one of our main characters in all of our stories in culture. So I thought it's a neat story. So I want to build this eagle, and so that's what inspired us to do that. Is behind that story of Area 27. They wanted to be able to keep that too in the story, so they're going to kind of put a storyboard around that for the sculpture once it's finished. So when I started doing artwork, I started with an arrow, and it turned into a spear. I started doing steel sculptures like that, steels and steel arrows, steel spears, things like that, shields. And then I realized that those are just figures of like native culture, and I wanted to actually get a little bit deeper. So I started really listening to a lot of our elders and a lot of our people in our territory, as well as here in Penticton, Simpington as we call it, about a lot of the stories that we have here, and they're called chaptīs. So when I started hearing these stories, I started picturing steel sculptures built representing these stories. And the reason why I wanted to go with the stories is because they need to be something more meaningful. And I kept hearing the idea that we're losing our language, we're losing our stories, and I thought, what better way to build a story, one of our stories and our chaptīs, out of steel. So hopefully it'll stay here and be asked about for hundreds of years. So I really started looking at different designs I could do and different styles I could do with my sculptures that represent our chaptīs. And lately, the 4 food chiefs is quite common. A lot of people ask for a 4 food chiefs sculpture. So I'll build those, and the 4 food chiefs is our black bear, our salmon, our sia, which is berry, it's a Saskatoon berry, and our speetlum, which is a bitter root. And those are 4 food chiefs. And to be able to build any of those and have people ask what are those is the exact reason why I wanted to build these, is because when people ask what are those, then they're asking for a story in a way. What does it mean? Like, what does it represent? So, and hopefully that continues on for time and time to be able to teach people some of our stories and get an idea of who we are and where we come from. So that inspiration for our stories is, for me, is a great thing to be able to do, and to build it out of steel is even, for me, is a greater thing, is the best thing I could do for the future of my kids, my grandchildren, and other people, right? So I would like in the future be able to, in the process, to be able to do the story of horse and coyote, as well as bear and fly. So in the future, hopefully we'll be able to see a lot more of those. When I was younger, I started doing artwork with pencil on paper when I was in grade 3. I won my first award when I was in grade 3 for best realistic drawing, and I thought from there that this is kind of what I wanted to do. So as I got older, I got into paintings and more drawings, and then I started getting into tattooing at about the age of 13, I think it was 12, 13 years old. I started getting into the age of tattooing, or started getting into tattooing. At that point, it was like just pointillism and tack tattooing, I guess you would call it in a way. Then I turned over to the professional work of tattooing at the age of probably 20, and I was into it till I was 37, 35, around there. So I got into that, and tattooing was probably one of my best art classes. I call it an art class because it's a learning form of art every day. So the reason why I say that is because when I have people come to me and ask me for different artwork that they want on their body, as far as from like could be Scandinavian to other cultures, could have been Mayan, could have been like a Moko style, like in different forms, different artwork around the world. I wasn't just the type of person to say, okay, I'll tattoo that on you. I actually had to know what I was tattooing on my clients, so I'd actually teach myself what it was they were getting tattooed before I'd tattoo them. So I learned a lot about different styles of art in all these art forms around the world. And so I took that, and as I was getting into tattooing, things got a little bit crazy in the tattoo world. I decided to step away from tattooing before tattooing took over my life, and decided to pick up a welder since I started welding since I was like 12 years old. I thought, I'm going to start welding things together, so I started doing that, and that's where the arrow story comes in from, when my dad was building these little gates and stuff. And it just kind of carried on, and my dad does the same work I do. He's the one that started it before I did. And it was kind of weird because I kind of thought that was a crazy thing to do for, you know, building sculptures out of steel like how my dad was, until I realized that that's the next step in my life as far as artwork goes. And from that point on, I just kept going, and that's where I'm at today. How I got to where I'm at to create my culture into my steel artwork is once again, I go back to my tattooing days, as tattooing was taking over my life. I used to actually drink quite a bit because of tattooing and partying, just because of the surrounding people that I was hanging out with. And it got to be a daily process of me waking up and having to have my drink and do all this and that. So, and it just progressed to the point where I was drinking absolutely every day, and to the point where people didn't even know if I was drunk or not, right? And at that point, I realized I started getting myself into trouble by just having these different thoughts and how I was. So as I continued this on, I literally woke up one day, and it sounds kind of crazy and might hear it all the time, but I literally woke up one day and it was like somebody just took a switch and just turned it off. And it was about 9:30 in the morning. I was hungover, and it just dawned on me that I just quit. And so I told my wife at the time, you know, I'm done partying, I'm done drinking. And of course, you know, because I drank so much and partied so much and had so many friends that would hang out and party with me all the time, they all kind of just laughed at me about it. And I didn't take offense to it, because I could understand at that moment that, you know, that was a different kind of lifestyle. So I kind of backed away from all that. And as I backed away from it and started getting clean, got sober, started getting clean, I started realizing I needed to make goals for myself. So one of them was I needed to step away from tattooing, for one, because that was a huge reason why I was turning out the way I was and doing what I was doing. And it sounds like I'm actually blaming tattooing, but it wasn't that. It was me, and just me being vulnerable to everything that was around me. So tattooing was the best thing for me, but I had to step away from that just to correct myself. And as I corrected myself, I said to myself, like, I needed to have goals. So one of my goals was to pay attention to more of my culture and who I was, because I never had the time to think about that when I was you know, engaging in alcohol and all the, you know, that kind of lifestyle. So I had to step away from that. So, but I still needed to keep my hands busy. So I got into welding, and I started, you know, tapping in and helping my dad more. And he was building these sculptures and gates and stuff. I had little sculptures and gates and stuff. And things started going from there, and that's where the arrow story comes in, where I built my first arrow that I sold. And then from there, I just kept carrying on. I started working with my dad, and we worked together for quite a while. And then I just kept going on and just kept welding. And in that process, that helped me out. But in that process, I had to understand more of my culture, more of my tradition, and I promised myself I'd get more into that. So it had nothing to do with my steel work, but as I evolved into my steel art, it actually kind of molded into each other to be what I build today is what I call like very meaningful sculptures that I build now. Like I said, to be able to be here for hundreds of years for my grandkids, my great-grandkids to see and understand, because, you know, it's the best thing I could do for them, and what I could do for anybody else, and our stories and our culture, right? So it's my 2 cents to be able to put in to help out, right? And for all the times that I've actually taken away from myself, my kids, or anybody else that was involved in my old days of partying and stuff, right? So time to kick in and do what has to be done, I guess, and to help out. And that was my direction of that. So
you mentioned at one point that money is being left at your sculptures. Can you talk about that whole tradition? Yeah. That's very exciting.
So we just recently built a sculpture that we call the Traditional Dancer. The Traditional Dancer was a sculpture that I've always kind of wanted to do for the last 3 years. I could picture him in my head. So when we first started, we had a chance to build the Traditional Dancer. We just started, and my partner Rick, for I think one of the first times, started getting to understand how I think, how I see things, which he couldn't understand how I see it really, but how I think and how I build this, because I didn't have no real blueprint to go by. It was just everything in my head. So I just started cutting and welding and bending. And by the time we were done, I built a complete frame that stood to be 14 feet tall of a traditional dancer. And so in a traditional dancer stance, he's standing a certain way, he's got a certain pose. I can picture all of this. He's holding certain things that he holds close to him. He's dressed a certain way, he looks a certain style, and he stands 14 feet tall, which is pretty cool. So when we were asked to deliver this sculpture to its final standing place, which is at the wine village just before Vernon, from Penticton to Oliver. It's just in the outskirts of Oliver, on the north side of Oliver. The wine village, you go there in the roundabout. So when we put them there and placed them there, it only took a matter of days before some people were phoning me up that knew that I did the sculpture and said, hey, there's some $5 bills and $10 bills sitting at the feet of the sculpture, just sitting there in the rocks. That it's, what do we do? And I'm like, well, I don't know. So as days went on, I started getting more phone calls from people that were telling me that there's just tons of $5 bills and $10 bills floating around all over the parking lot in this place because of that sculpture. What's going on with this? Like, what do we do with this? And I said, and that's when it dawned on me that people are leaving money at the feet of the sculpture, because at a real powwow, when we're at a powwow, when we see a dancer that we like or that we're interested in, or that we want to follow a bit, we say our own prayers. And when we say our own prayers, we thank those dancers by putting dollar bills at their feet to help them, just thanking them for carrying our prayers to where they need to be. And that's exactly what was happening with our traditional dancers, is people were laying dollar bills at his feet to help him for the prayers that they needed to do for whatever needed to be done. So, and that's why the dollar bills were at his feet, which when I heard about this and realized what was going on, I thought that was such a cool honor and stuff. So I got a hold of the owner of that sculpture now and requested that they put some kind of a box there to collect the money and maybe donate it to some kind of organization, whether it be for education or Orange Shirt, all children, all children matter, or residential, anything like that, to maybe donate that money to, or even just to a scholarship, so anything that'll help to be able to teach, right? So, and they thought that'd be a great idea. So I think this year that's what they're going to be doing, and that's what I hope they go in the direction of anyway. So that's pretty cool.
That's beautiful, is what that is. That's really great.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought that was neat.
What do you want people to know about what kinds of things that you feel are maybe not as represented as you want? What are we missing? There's a lot, I know.
Trying to understand artists. It's hard. Like, I think in a weird way, we're kind of a different people. We think differently. We have a bigger imagination. We like to think, we like to wish, we like to see things in a bigger process. And what's missing, say, for me as an artist, is my sculptures haven't actually a voice. If I could have my sculptures have a voice, that would be really cool, to tell the stories, to be able to sit down and understand them and not just see them but hear them. Because I really like to sit and talk about who we are as First Nations people, Native people. Even those words itself too is confusing, because a lot of people don't like it, a lot of those words, whether it be First Nations, Native, Indian, Aboriginal. It's so controversial from all angles. So I think what is missing is just the pure understanding of just who we are as, I like to say, originals, and where we at and where we stand, right? And is I think what's missing. And if I could add that to my sculptures and stuff, just myself personally, that would be great. So when I agree to a sculpture that I'm going to do, it's only because in my head I've already built it. So when they ask me, can you build a coyote standing on a rock, or can you build even a fire pit like we have in the back, Within 5 minutes, if I agree to it, it's only because it's in my head and I've already built it in my head, from like how thick a steel it's going to be, to every shape and bend, to even roughly to what the image is going to look like, as far as cutouts go, or how it's going to stand or look. So it's just that quick, right? So for me, my imagination is, I've been told, so far out there that, you know, a lot of my friends don't know if I'm crazy or if I'm a genius. So when I say I'm going to build something, it's because I already had it built in my head, and it kind of comes as second nature. Like my right hand man, Rick Hamilton, he's seen me do it many times, and to this day he still goes like, how did you even think of that? It's like, well, I don't know, it's kind of just quick, fast in my head, and it's just how I see it.
Thank you so much, Clint. We really appreciate you talking to us today about your art. And
well, I really appreciate you guys coming up, and tend to ask, what do you do in my shop? You know, what do you do in your shop and stuff? And yeah, well, here it is. I don't really call it a studio. Some people say that's your studio. I still see it as a shop. I'm still a welder.